All right, guys, continuing the conversation from Friday. We left off with the second commandment, and today we're going to talk about the third commandment and finish up this chapter, chapter 7, in Unit 7. So, just as a quick recap, first commandment, there's only one God. We're called to love him. Second commandment, we're not supposed to use God's name or really anyone's name or treat it without respect, right? Which leads us to the third commandment, which is pretty straightforward. The third commandment teaches us, you shall not, that's not it. The third commandment, sorry, my notes are a little bit messed up at the moment. The third commandment teaches us, um, remember to keep holy the Lord's Day. It's a positive commandment. It's telling us to do something as opposed to not do something. So when we talk about negative commandments or positive commandments, we're really not talking about like they're telling us to do something positive or do something negative. A negative commandment is something that we should not do. A positive commandment is something that we should do. So in the case of the third commandment, if we're being asked to do something, in this case, remember that the Sabbath, remember that the Lord's Day, we use those two terms interchangeably, are something that we're supposed to remember, right? So when we look at the third commandment, it really stresses two values. The value of rest and relaxation, right? Remember when we go back to the story of creation, right? On the seventh day, God rested. It's not because God needs rest. It's because he was directing us to the importance of rest and relaxation in our lives. Um, because right now you're kind of not into it, but as we went throughout the school year and as we go back next year, there's a daily grind, right? And we need time away from that daily grind, and Sunday is one of those things. So that's the first value. The second value, of course, goes back to the first commandment. What are we called to do? Love God with all our heart, all our mind, all our soul, right? Sorry, I don't mean to shake the camera. Um, and the second value then relates to that in terms of we are called to worship God, right? The Sabbath day, the Lord's day, is a day of prayer, worship, and adoration of God. So, again, just another way to express these. The first value or understanding in terms of valuing rest and relaxation requires that we stop our daily pursuits, right? Most of you, when I ask you, what is it you find, what do you define as success? Most of you say something about success as being rich or being able to do what I want with money, right? And this kind of commandment kind of refocuses you on what's supposed to truly be important, right? And that's spending time with our families, refreshing and renewing our minds doing so, our bodies, our spirits, right? But the second value, of course, is that we need, right? There's an inherent need in the human person to worship God, right? To express love for that being which created us, which we call God. And as Catholics, we do this by participation in and through the Eucharist. Now, obviously, in the times that we're in right now, this is really strained because we can't share in the Eucharist. And I would imagine some of you are really beginning to kind of see the importance of, weekly, or if not daily, access to Christ that he makes available to us that's currently not being made available to us. So, something to think about as we move forward in this. So, when we look at the third commandment, it's really looking at it through those two lenses. When we're called to remember to keep holy the Lord's Day, we're supposed to do it because it's a day of rest and relaxation for us to take away from the reality that work, right? The work that we do is not what life is about, right? It's about family, it's about friends, it's about God. And the second thing, of course, relates to that. We are made to love God, love family. And so this is the kind of call to us to, at the bare minimum, set aside a day to do those things. Okay? Um, so that then begs the question, why do we go to Mass? Which is an inevitable question, I think. And we often kind of come up with any kind of excuse not to go, right? Mass is boring. I don't get anything out of it. Only hypocrites go to Mass. I can worship God just as well in nature. And maybe one or all of those things are true for you. It doesn't negate the reality that we still need to go, right? Mass is boring. Why, right? It's not entertaining. Well, are you supposed to be entertained at Mass? No, you're supposed to learn, right? And you're supposed to receive, right? Receive the love that God is offering to you and to offer it back, right? To continue to love in return. Right now, I think we're really, hopefully, beginning to understand it's really a privilege to participate in the Eucharist, right? And in the early church, only committed practicing Christians were actually allowed to, right? Even today, not everyone is allowed to participate in the celebration of the Eucharist. And obviously today, none of us can in terms of going and celebrating the Mass as it should be celebrated. So that first one, Mass is boring. Maybe, right? But that's not the point and purpose of Mass in terms of you being entertained. Okay. I don't get anything out of it. Well, that may be, but that's on you, right? There's a lot of stuff you can get out of it. Whatever kind of approach you take to it, are you going there as an attempt to grow in community with the people around you, which is one of the purposes of Mass? Are you going there to learn something? There's a lot of opportunities to be instructed if you are open to them. Are you going to participate as part of your family? Maybe your family doesn't go. Are you going by yourself? So when we look at this one, there's stuff that we can get out of it if we choose to. And we might not be choosing to, but again, it's an excuse. It's not a reality as far as don't get anything out of it. Only hypocrites go to Mass. Yeah, we're all hypocrites, right? We all screw up. We all fail. It's kind of like the excuse, only sick people go to the hospital. Well, no duh, right? That's what they're supposed to be going there for. So hypocrites go for healing. All of us need to go for that healing that we get there. And hopefully learn and grow and be less hypocritical in what we do. Okay? I can worship God just as well in nature. Sure you can. Of course you can, right? And I hope you do. I know I do. I go out for a walk every day, and I just am blown away by the goodness of God's creation. But here's the thing. There's a time for group prayer, right? And Christ made it clear in no uncertain terms that we're to come together and celebrate and take him in to our person, right? To receive him. And the way in which we receive him bodily, right? The Eucharist is only available at Mass, right? Or in special circumstances. And so that is the way that we're guaranteed, as long as we're in a state of grace, to receive him. And so, yes, you can worship God in nature, but that's a very Mass is a very specific way that we're called by Christ to specifically receive him and build relationship with him. Okay? So, let's take a look at the questions that you had for the second and third commandment. I have no idea what number these are. You should be able to look at them. I will read them to you really quickly, the questions that is, and give you the answers for them. What does the second commandment require? Okay. Define blasphemy and perjury. Why is the Sabbath to be a day of rest? List some activities that could sanctify this day. Why do Christians celebrate Sunday as the Lord's Day? And what is the meaning of the term Eucharist? Okay, so the first one, what does the second commandment require? It requires we respect God's name through blessing, praise, and adoration, right? And we should, by extension, also recognize the holiness of other people's names. When we look at this second commandment, right, it's really speaking to the importance and holiness that's instilled in names by the creator of the person that is named. Okay. The next question, define blasphemy and perjury. And I defined these for you guys in the last video, but I'll redefine them for you again today. Blasphemy is speaking words of hate, defiance, or reproach, right? Trying to correct God like God could be corrected, right? Against God. Perjury is defaming God through being untruthful and untrustworthy. So when you perjure yourself, you have sworn with God as your witness. And when we say God is our witness, we're saying God is a witness to the truth of what I'm saying. So when you lie, when you do that, you're essentially saying that God's a liar, right? So that's the problem with perjury. You're defaming his good name, right? Thus violating the second commandment, which is about names. The third question, why is the Sabbath to be a day of rest? List some activities that could sanctify this day. We go back to sacred scripture. Sabbath should be a day of rest because God rested on the seventh day. Activities which we can do, right, to sanctify the day. So there is stuff we can do on this day, but we sanctify it through it being restful, relaxing stuff, right? Healthy exercise, relaxing activities, quality time spent with your family, stuff that is going to allow you to pull away from the grind of the day-to-day activities, the day-to-day work that you're called to. Number 4, why do Christians celebrate Sunday as the Lord's Day? For Christians, Sunday is the Lord's Day because Christ, the Lord, rose at Easter on Sunday, right? Just a quick kind of history lesson here for you guys. Traditionally, the earliest Christians, so those that were Christians from 30-ish AD after Christ's death to about 70 or so AD. So for the first 10 years or so after Christ's death, the Christians didn't call themselves Christians. They called themselves followers of the way. Besides that, they thought of themselves really as Jewish people, right? Because they were. And so they, as good Jewish people, celebrated on the Sabbath in the synagogue, and then on Sundays celebrated on the Lord's Day. Now, the celebration is very similar to the separation that we have in the Mass today. The liturgy of the Word, which we would recognize as the liturgy of the Word, occurred on Saturdays in the synagogue, and then the liturgy of the Eucharist would occur privately at people's houses on Sundays. Eventually, and this is what led to this celebration of the Eucharist primarily on Sundays, the Jewish people got sick and tired of the Christians because they were bringing a lot of unwanted attention on the entirety of Judaism by the Roman occupiers, Roman government, and they kicked them out. And so the early Christians were no longer allowed to celebrate in the synagogues and moved all of their worship to private homes on Sundays. That's really why it happens on Sundays. That's a long answer for a question. You don't need to have all that, but that's why we celebrate 2,000 years later on Sundays instead of Saturdays. Although some of us go to church on Saturdays, but that is what we call a vigil mass. Vigil is something that happens the day before. Okay. The fifth and final question, what is the meaning of the term Eucharist? We should know this. Eucharist means thanksgiving or giving thanks. Okay, so that's it for this chapter. Please make sure you study for your quiz, which is going to be Tuesday. If you have any questions, you might be watching this on Monday if you're not staying up too late on Sunday when I finally post this onto YouTube. Please ask at any point during the day on Monday or even during the day on Tuesday before you take your quiz if you have any questions about what you should be studying for, what you need to know. All right, love you guys, miss you guys, and I will see you in class on Monday and Wednesday. They won't be very long. I'll just be coming in, popping in to check in on you guys, touch base with you guys. But I miss you terribly, and I will see you. Bye.